king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 317 Institutional Reform. The expansion of Auric Palace is in full swing. Of course, this does not affect the daily work of the palace, because the expansion is just adding walls and buildings around the old palace. At most, the noise during the construction is very loud, which affects the mood of the people working in the palace. Fortunately, there are no cutting machines in this era that can produce extremely harsh and sharp noises. Otherwise, listening to these noises would be quite frustrating. But even so, Marin, a modern man who was used to enjoying life, was still not used to the noisy sounds around the palace. So, he began to feel a little irritated. At the same time, he also began to be unwilling to deal with so many government affairs every day. Therefore, Marin decided to add some institutions to share his work. The first thing to be established is the Secretariat, which is an organization that helps its boss to handle miscellaneous tasks. According to the saying of later generations, let the secretary do things when there are things to do, and do nothing when there are no things to do. However, because the 4 college student secretaries who worked with Marin were all men, the second half of the sentence was not true, but the first half could still be partially true. Moreover, the country is not a company, and Marin could not really hand over power to the Secretariat. For example, military power, financial power, and important personnel appointment power, Marin did not intend to give power to the Secretariat. Military power. Marin intended to take over the general staff in the city, but because the military education in the East Frisian state had just started, it would take 10 or 8 years to train officers with the ability to serve as staff officers. Therefore, the general staff could not be established for the time being. As for the financial power, Marin will definitely hand it over to Kohler for the time being. After all, Kohler is still relatively trustworthy, at least for now. Of course, it is also because Marin is currently seriously lacking in talent. Therefore, Marin requires that the Ministry of Finance, which is led by Kohler and supplemented by several college students such as Robbie, has a certain degree of independence and can reject some unreasonable expenditure requests from Prime Minister Jeffrey. Of course, if the Prime Minister's request is rejected, a report must be formed and reported to the Secretariat, and then handed over to Marin himself for review to avoid a situation where the Ministry of Finance and the Prime Minister fight. As for the important power of personnel appointment, that goes without saying. Without military power, financial power and important power of personnel appointment, the Prime Minister is just a pure civil servant who handles miscellaneous affairs and cannot make any waves. Marin wanted to be lazy, so he planned to train the Secretariat into an audit department representing himself. What they reviewed were the administrative documents and handling opinions handed over by Jeffrey. Then, the Secretariat made instructions one by one according to Marin's request and used Marin's seal. Of course, there was no Marin's signature. When the Secretariat was first established, Marin had thought about preventing it from expanding into an institution similar to the Ming Dynasty cabinet. Therefore, Marin limited the power of the Secretariat. The Secretariat staff could only use seals and make instructions under Marin's guidance. Moreover, the Secretariat cannot make instructions on anything related to military and finance. Unless Marin is away for something, they can make instructions according to the form strictly formulated by Marin. However, in some more important situations, they are not qualified to make instructions. For example, large-scale military mobilization cannot be carried out without Marin's personal signature. The Secretariat uses Marin's seal, and the number of troops that can be mobilized is no more than 100 people. Moreover, these 100 people must not be in Auric or enter Auric, so as to avoid a palace coup. Even in Marin's vision, even if the general staff is established in the future, the troops in Auric cannot be mobilized. The troops in the capital can only be commanded by the people Marin trusts most. Without the power to command military affairs, review finances, or appoint important personnel, the Secretariat is just a department that handles miscellaneous matters. Of course, it also has a certain weight because it reviews the opinions submitted by the Prime Minister. In this way, the power of the Prime Minister was limited, but the Secretariat could not handle the documents on its own and could only review them. Kohler could also supervise the finances and check and balance the two parties. In the future, Marin even plans to set up an agency similar to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, to supervise his subordinates and prevent them from having any ill intentions. However, Marin does not have relevant talents at hand at the moment, so he has to let Saul's subordinates start to exercise their abilities in this area. But even so, Marin decided to limit the power of this intelligence agency. Whether it was the Jinyui or Dongchang of the Ming Dynasty, or the spies during the Republic of China, they all became a scourge because they had extraordinary law enforcement powers. Therefore, even if such an intelligence agency was established, Marin did not intend to give them the power of judicial trial to prevent them from becoming bigger and creating wrongful cases. To this end, Marin came up with a solution, that is, to let the Intelligence Bureau only have the power of investigation, evidence and prosecution, similar to the prosecutorial organs of later generations. However, the prosecutorial organs are open and can be easily monitored by those with ulterior motives. The Intelligence Bureau is secret, and those with ulterior motives cannot monitor it, but will be monitored secretly. Therefore, its role is greater than that of the prosecutorial organs. However, the Intelligence Bureau does not have the final judicial power, and even the law enforcement power has been compressed to the limit. If you want to arrest an official or noble, you must obtain the authorization of the Chief Justice. Moreover, the judicial power also belongs to the court. In this way, no matter how powerful the Intelligence Bureau is, it can avoid becoming bigger because it does not have the judicial power and the ability to frame others. But because of its pervasive ability, it can also make Marin sharp-eyed and sharp-eared and understand the situation across the country to avoid being deceived. In addition, the existence of the Intelligence Bureau can deter those who have ill intentions with just a few beautiful moves. With the rise of commercial trade, Marin could foresee that the urban population in East Frisia would increase. Then, the problem of urban security would need to be taken seriously. Previously, the urban population of the county of East Frisia was very small, but Marin is now expanding cities on a large scale and promoting immigration, so the urban population will definitely become quite large in the future. Cities are also places where filth and dirt are hidden. In the current rural areas, due to the existence of serf manors, serfs are restricted within the manors and do not run around. There is not much floating population. As long as the manor owner or manager manages the serfs according to the law, there is no public security problem in the countryside. But cities are different. Cities have always been places where all kinds of people gather, and there are many messy things. Without law enforcement forces, it will not work. Before, although there were sheriffs in various places, they were usually local officials serving concurrently. Moreover, the sheriffs under them were not regular. They were either the sheriff's subordinates or simply local soldiers. These people were often gangsters and hooligans, and their law enforcement was also rough. There were even acts of oppressing the people. Compared with the sheriffs of this era, the urban management officers of later generations are not too civilized. So, Marin signed an order to abolish the sheriff and set up a special police force. Of course, the sheriff system was still used in rural areas, and other officials served concurrently. But in the 5 major cities, Auric, Emden, Leer, Denburg and Norden, Marin established police stations, abolished the former sheriffs, and established formal police stations. The former sheriffs were replaced by police chiefs. The police were originally some former soldiers who had retired due to injuries after the last battle in Lisle County. Of course, although these veterans could no longer stay in the army, their injuries were not too serious, so at least they could form a team to beat up gangsters. These people have received rigorous military training and have strict discipline. They will not oppress the people like gangsters, but they are also very combat capable and can keep the situation under control. Marin selected a total of 300 outstanding soldiers who chose to retire after being injured, and sent them to 5 cities to establish police forces. The police are different from ordinary people. They need to be able to beat up thugs at any time and also have the ability to stop riots. Marin hesitated for a long time in choosing weapons. First of all, the musket is not suitable. The musket is too lethal, suitable for killing people, not for law enforcement. Moreover, the muskets of this era take too long to load and have poor accuracy. If you can't hit the criminal with one shot, it will bring bad luck to yourself, and it is easy to accidentally injure innocent people. Therefore, Marin first ruled out firearms. Anyway, he had already banned guns throughout the country, so he didn't have to worry about people using guns to fight against the police. So, Marin began to consider equipping the police with swords. As a result, the light sword used by knights came into Marin's sight. This light sword is easy to carry and not heavy, suitable for police to patrol, perform tasks and fight crime. Therefore, the light sword must be equipped. However, when teaching a lesson to a troublemaker, it is easy to hurt someone if you draw your sword. Therefore, it is necessary to equip a baton. However, Marin did not have rubber and could not make a professional rubber baton for beating people. So Marin thought of the fighting artifact of later generations, the baseball bat. Then, the baseball bat became one of the equipment of the police. When encountering troublemakers or hooligans, the police don't need to draw their swords, they can just use baseball bats to beat them up. However, when facing a group of people making trouble, it is a bit troublesome. So, Marin thought of the riot police who used shields in later generations. The reason for using shields is to resist the attack of objects thrown by rioters, and to a certain extent, it can also resist knives. Moreover, the riot police with shields lined up in rows can also use shields to forcibly push away and drive away the rioting crowd. Therefore, Marin decided that the police's riot gear would be a square wooden shield, a baseball bat, and a wooden riot hat. Such equipment can beat up any gangsters and resist angry crowds. In the future, after Marin obtains peppers from America, he plans to make spicy pepper powder to replace tear gas to disperse the crowd. However, the person who uses it must wear glasses and a mask first, otherwise it will endanger himself. After establishing the Secretariat, strengthening the Ministry of Finance, setting up the Intelligence Bureau and the Police Bureau, Marin also set up tax bureaus in the 5 major cities for the development of domestic business. The tax bureau personnel were dispatched by Marin himself, and Kohler's Ministry of Finance sent people to assist. In other cities, the tax bureau mainly collected taxes from shops and vendors on the streets. Even the city entry tax was under the jurisdiction of the tax bureau. Marin stipulated that the single tax system would be adopted in the future. In other words, in the future, people entering and leaving the city would only have to pay the entry tax, not the exit tax. At the same time, various tax checkpoints in the country were abolished, and local governments were not allowed to set up tax checkpoints privately. The tax collection power was returned to the tax bureau. For goods in transit, as long as the local tax bureau issued an invoice and stamped it, when they arrived at another place in the East Frisian county, they only needed to show the stamped invoice. As long as the type and quantity of the goods on the invoice matched the inspection results, no more taxes would be collected. This reform is quite progressive. In the Middle Ages, it was common for local governments in the same country to set up private tax stations. Moreover, the taxes collected by these private tax stations were not handed over to the government, but were divided up privately by local officials. Marin's move actually hurt the interests of local officials. If it happened in another country, he might have encountered great resistance. But the East Frisian state was different. Most of the old East Frisian nobles who followed the Sexner family were killed by Marin. The remaining old nobles and new nobles were very afraid of the ruthless Marin. Therefore, they dared not violate Marin's policies, lest they be snapped. Therefore, with his previous notoriety, Marin easily took back the power of commercial taxation in various places, and only retained the power of various places to keep a certain amount of withholding when collecting agricultural taxes. After all, local officials also need to eat. However, the people from the tax bureau will also send people to supervise the whole process to prevent these original tax officials from extorting the people. But in fact, in Germany at this time, the fields and the countryside were basically in the hands of the powerful, and there were basically no self-cultivating farmers. Even if the tax officials wanted to extort, there were no suitable targets. Those manor owners were basically nobles or relatives of nobles, and they were not easy to mess with. In the past, the ordinary people doing business in the city were very suitable targets for extortion. But Marin took back the right to levy taxes in the city, so in fact, those original tax officials could not make extra money, and at most they could only go to the manors in the countryside to eat and drink. As a result, 4 new institutions were established in the county of East Frisia: the Secretariat, the Intelligence Bureau, the Police Bureau and the Tax Bureau. The police and tax bureaus are easy to deal with. They can follow the old practices and add some new ideas to get started right away. But the Intelligence Bureau has no precedent to follow, so it can only slowly explore. Moreover, the relevant talents also need to be cultivated and explored. As for the Secretariat, facing 4 young college students, Marin did not expect them to get started right away. At least, it would take 1 or 2 years for these bookish college students to gradually adapt to government work and become politicians. By then, Marin could get rid of most of his burdens and have time to do something else. Of course, although Marin wanted to get rid of the burden, he was not stupid. As for the most important military power and important personnel appointment power, Marin would never let go at any time. As long as he grasped these 2 powers, no matter how the people below made trouble, they would not be able to make any waves. Chapter 318 Blackwater Mercenary Company. After solving some reform problems in official institutions, Marin turned his attention to the military and decided to reform it. Frankly speaking, the size of the 10,000 regular standing army that Marin currently maintains is the largest among all the European counties. Even most duchies do not have such a size. Even some kingdoms do not have a standing army of 10,000 in normal times. For example, the Kingdom of Portugal usually has only 5,000 to 6,000 standing army. Only in times of war will it be temporarily expanded. In addition to the 10,000 regular standing troops, East Frisia currently has 7,000 reserve troops. During the slack season, these 7,000 reserve troops often gather for training without any relaxation. The combined size of the 17,000-man army, coupled with the power of defeating Saxony's 20,000-man army, made the neighbors of the county of East Frisia feel very frightened and uneasy. As a result, many principalities close to East Frisia proposed to the imperial parliament, asking Marin to disband the huge standing army so that the neighbors could breathe a sigh of relief. After all, it was too scary for a small principality of only 3,000 square kilometers to maintain 10,000 standing troops and 7,000 second-line troops. Coincidentally, when Marin was carrying out institutional reforms, the Worms imperial parliament sent an official letter requesting Marin not to retain so many standing troops in peacetime to avoid causing misunderstandings. Although Marin was not afraid of the imperial parliament, after thinking it over again and again, he did not want to offend the imperial parliament. You know, the imperial parliament is the collective will of all the princes of Germany. Although the emperor also has his own voice in it, he does not have the upper hand. Most importantly, even if Maximilian I wanted to make his voice heard in the imperial diet, he would need to unite many nobles from the Saxon and Swabian families to achieve his goal. But now, the Saxon family and Marin have long been enemies. Even if the emperor wanted to support Marin in the imperial parliament, he could not get the support of the Saxon nobles. Moreover, in order to appease the Saxon nobles and win their support, most of the emperor's forces abstained from voting on this resolution to show their neutral position between the Saxon nobles and Marin. The emperor abstained from voting, and since most of the princes were opponents of the emperor, the resolution was easily passed. Although Marin had obtained the legal status of a county, he had not been able to send his own legal representatives to the imperial parliament. The reason was simple: most of the members of the imperial parliament disagreed. The princes knew very well that Marin was on the side of the emperor. If he was accepted into the imperial parliament, it would be equivalent to giving the emperor an extra vote. Therefore, although the imperial parliament did not reject Marin's will to become the count of the empire, it refused to allow the county of East Frisia to become a formal member of the imperial parliament. Therefore, Marin passively accepted this resolution without knowing it in advance. Even if the emperor sent someone to tell him the news in advance, it would be useless. Because when the imperial parliament was arguing in a meeting, he had no idea. Marin could also rudely reject the decision of the imperial parliament, but that would come at a price. Although it was unlikely that the members of the imperial parliament would unite to beat Marin, Marin still did not want to see such a thing happen. Moreover, even if he was not beaten up, Marin was worried about being economically sanctioned. Therefore, Marin had to compromise. However, Marin was not happy to disband the 10,000 regular troops that had just been trained and only retain a small number of them. After all, it was easy to disband the army, but it was difficult to reunite the elite soldiers. After all, veterans with experience in major battles are very popular in this era of endless war. As soon as Marin disbanded those veterans, other forces might come to win over these veterans. Moreover, these veterans have all received Marin's modern military training. Once they leave and are hired, Marin's military training methods will spread on a large scale. By then, everyone will be modernized. How can Marin maintain his military advantage? Even if the Spaniards and Teutons came to learn the Marin phalanx, Marin only explained the phalanx to them in detail, but did not emphasize the importance of modern military training. Therefore, what they learned was mainly the use of the Spanish phalanx, not the full set. Therefore, no matter what, Marin was unwilling to disband most of the soldiers, especially those smart officers, whom Marin was even more unwilling to lose. Those old soldiers who were co-opted may not understand the importance of modern military discipline. But those officers who were co-opted, even if they did not understand the principles, were able to perfectly replicate modern military training. The problem is that Marin now has to keep all his men on the one hand, and on the other hand, he has to give an account to the imperial parliament on the surface. So, after much thought, Marin finally came up with a way to fool the imperial parliament. That is, to form a company and absorb most of the soldiers. Change their identities from regular soldiers to mercenaries under the company. This move was naturally learned from the British and Dutch East India companies in later generations. These two East India companies were the pioneers of the two countries' colonization of the East. In name, they were not official institutions of the two countries, but private institutions. However, the East India companies of both countries had huge armies. The number of mercenaries of the British East India Company ruling India in the later period reached an astonishing 200,000 to 300,000. The number of mercenaries of the Dutch East India Company was also over 10,000. Therefore, Marin's plan was to transfer most of the soldiers' organizational relationship to this company, so that the number of standing troops of the East Frisian state would be reduced to 2 square formations, totaling 2,500 people. The other 7,500 people would become private company armed forces. Marin had already plagiarized the company's name, Blackwater. Its logo also uses the black bear paw from Blackwater's early days. After everything was done, Marin signed an order to establish a private armed contracting company, Blackwater, and transferred the relationship of 7,500 soldiers to the company. Of course, their titles and fiefs in the East Frisian state were all retained. However, when they were communicating with the outside world, they claimed to be employees of Blackwater. Internally, there was actually no change. As for the shareholders of the company, Marin made up a few names and registered them. But in fact, the major shareholders were all aliases of their own accounts. In addition, several senior generals such as Schwartz and Frundsberg also each held 1% of the company's dry shares, with only the right to dividends, but no cash, and no right to speak. As for the 5 major shareholders, in addition to Marin's publicized real name, Marin selected 4 puppets as representatives to attend the meeting in a fake manner and pretend to be shareholders. But in fact, the only job of these 4 so-called shareholders, when attending the shareholders' meeting, was to raise their hands to agree with all the decisions of the largest shareholder Marin, and then applaud. Then, Marin divided the army. Schwartz continued to serve as the senior general of the East Frisian army, and was promoted to the top general of the army, responsible for commanding the 2,500 standing troops. Frundsberg, who was originally as famous as Schwartz, was arranged by Marin to join the Blackwater Company as the chief general of the Blackwater Company, managing the 7,500 people. At the same time, Frundsberg's title and fiefdom in the East Frisian county were not affected in any way. After tinkering with everything, Marin officially announced to the public that he would cut 7,500 troops and only retain 2,500 regular troops, that is, 2 phalanxes. But the neighbors were not happy yet. 3 days later, Marin announced the establishment of the Blackwater Mercenary Company, taking over the 7,500 East Frisian county's troops that had been disbanded. The largest shareholder of Blackwater was Count Marin of East Frisian. Now, everyone can see that Marin did not disband the army at all. He just passed the command of the army from the left hand to the right hand in order to superficially deal with the criticism of the imperial parliament. It was basically a change of soup but not medicine. However, this move at least did not appear to have any problems on the surface. Because, Marin did accept the opinion of the imperial parliament on the surface. Those 7,500 people were indeed not regular troops. It was just that they still secretly accepted Marin's command. Therefore, despite being very angry, the bigwigs of the imperial parliament could not find any reason with Marin. You know, on the surface, Marin only holds 40% of Blackwater's shares, not 51% of the absolute controlling rights. Therefore, on the surface, it can also be said that Marin has lost absolute control over the 7,500 soldiers. Moreover, the simple medieval Europeans did not know that the other 4 major shareholders were actually puppets found by Marin. They naively thought that there were really 4 wealthy people from the East Frisian county who invested in the company. After the establishment of Blackwater, Frundsberg, as the company's chief, took over the company's first business, assisting the regular army of East Frisia to defend the border. Well, they are clearly still serving as the army of the East Frisian state. Their salaries are no different from before. However, on the surface, these mercenaries are no longer the regular army of East Frisian state. Several neighboring countries that were hostile to the East Frisian state, such as Saxony and Oldenburg, were almost furious. Their spies saw across the border that most of the East Frisian barracks, which originally flew the Golden Eagle flag with 3 crosses on each hat, the Block family flag, had simply changed their flags to the Blackwater Company flag with black bear paws. But in fact, their troops did not move at all, they just changed their flags. Chapter 319, Sister-in-law, What Do You Want to Do? Angela was very happy these days because with the help of her husband Marin, she was reunited with her father, mother and sister. Although her father fled to the Frisian Islands to avoid the public eye, her mother and sister have been with her these days, touring with her. What made her particularly happy was that her younger sister, who had always been dissatisfied with her, was so jealous that her eyes were almost on fire. Angela did not hate her younger sister Felice, but the 2 sisters had been used to fighting since they were young, always loving to compete with each other. Therefore, she was secretly happy to see her younger sister being humiliated. However, Angela was not stingy with her younger sister's living conditions, and gave them completely according to her own requirements. For example, no matter what delicious food she had, Angela would share it with her mother and sister. In addition, Angela also generously shared those beautiful silk clothes with her mother and sister. You have to know that in this era, silk clothes in Europe were very expensive. Any low-grade silk clothes would cost several gold coins. A better silk clothes would cost more than 10 or 20 gold coins. Ordinary noble families did not have many silk clothes. Only when attending formal events and banquets would noble ladies wear beautiful silk clothes. Under normal circumstances, ordinary noble ladies also wore woolen clothes. Only the ladies and ladies of the great noble families would always wear a full set of high-end silk clothes. And Felice's sister was just the kind of top-notch lady who always wore a full set of high-end silk clothes. In Angela's wardrobe, except for woolen clothes for winter, all other seasons were silk clothes, which were extremely luxurious and beautiful. Out of kindness, Angela also sent Felice a cupboard full of beautiful silk clothes. Originally, Angela was just concerned about her sister, but Felice believed that Angela was showing off. Of course, Angela did show off, but not much. After all, the little girl was still very kind. But Felice was different. She had always been a little petty and picky. The tragic experience she had in the past 2 years had made her even more sensitive. Therefore, she was very disgusted with Angela's kindness, thinking that was being given alms and that it was a serious act of showing off. So, the petty Felice decided to fight back and take revenge on Angela. As for how to take revenge, after much thought, Felice finally decided to seduce her brother-in-law Marin. Although Felice knew that she was not as pretty as her sister Angela, she knew that men were animals that liked new things and disliked old ones. Although Angela was pretty, she had been with Marin for 3 years. Marin was almost familiar with her. When she was with her mother Lucrezia, her mother had taught Felice a lot of secrets on how to please a man. With these secrets, Lucrezia successfully won the heart of Archbishop Rovere and became the Archbishop's long-term and stable mistress. Felice no longer had much hope for her future. Even though her father, Archbishop Rovere, promised to find her a nobleman to remarry in the future, Felice did not believe it. Because Archbishop Rovere did not tell Felice that he had obtained Cantrera and was going to poison the current pope and replace him. Therefore, Felice was not optimistic about the future of her father who was hiding like a stray dog. Therefore, she never thought about marrying again in the future. Even if she married, she would not marry a good man. After all, she had been married before, and her fool husband was still young. As long as her husband was alive, she could not remarry, otherwise it would be blasphemy against God. Because European marriages were sworn before God. After seeing her sister's infinite beauty, Felice's mentality was somewhat unbalanced. The reason why she wanted to seduce her brother-in-law Marin was not only to make trouble for her sister, but also to use Marin as a long-term meal ticket. Felice was not a fool and understood the ways of the world. For now, it was no problem for her to stay at her sister's house. But in the future, when her father arranged a new marriage for her, she would have to move out of the palace and rely on her future husband. Because she had been married before and her father, Archbishop Rovere, had an uncertain future, Felice did not think she could marry into a good family. It was a blessing from God that she could marry a knight. After much thought, Felice felt that it would be better to become the mistress of her brother-in-law Marin than to marry a husband she didn't know, with an uncertain future and unknown wealth. You know, from Angela, Felice learned that Marin was one of the richest earls in Europe. Not to mention the 1 million gold coins of compensation from the Duke of Saxony, Marin himself alone made a huge profit of more than 300,000 gold coins a year because of overseas trade. It can be said that brother-in-law Marin is now so poor that he only has money left. Angela's life is also extremely luxurious. Not only are the cupboards full of high-end silk clothes, but these high-end silk clothes are also embellished with gold, silver, and jewelry, which is extremely rich. Felice enjoys this kind of rich life. When she gets used to it, she will not be able to adapt to an ordinary life. As for being Marin's mistress without a legitimate status, Felice didn't care at all. Because her mother, Lucrezia, was a mistress without a legitimate status, but she lived a normal life. If it weren't for her father's misfortune, Felice would still be living an upper-class life in Rome. As for the future of her children, Felice didn't think too much about it. In her opinion, Marin was so rich that giving her and his illegitimate son a large piece of fiefdom and a lot of gold coins was nothing at all. Moreover, Felice felt very excited to compete with her sister who had been used to fighting for a man since she was a child. So, it was settled. When Angela wanted to take her mother and sister to cruise the island of Texel, Felice stayed in the palace of Auric to recuperate, on the pretext of being unwell, and sent her mother and sister away. That night, after finishing reviewing documents and teaching 4 young college students, Marin dragged his tired body back to the bedroom. Originally, Marin thought that Angela had gone to Texel Island, and he should stay alone in the empty room, so he had planned to go to bed early. Unexpectedly, as soon as he got into bed, he felt a hot body wrapped around him. Who? Marin was so frightened that his hair stood on end. He reached for his waist and prepared to pull out the clockwork flint gun that he often used for self-defense. However, he immediately realized that he had already taken off his clothes and the clockwork flint gun was also placed outside the bedroom. Taking advantage of the weak candlelight, Marin suddenly opened the quilt and saw a naked body in front of him. Sister-in-law. Marin was a little stunned. The person in front of him was not the assassin that Marin had imagined, but the legendary sister-in-law Felice, and she was naked. Marin swallowed hard. To be honest, Felice is not as pretty as Angela, and her skin color is darker. Of course, it's not that Felice is born dark. It's that in the past few years in the home of a small landowner in the countryside of Genoa, Felice was basically treated as a maid and often went to the fields to do farm work, so she got tanned. Of course, she was not very white originally. So, in Marin's eyes, the naked sister-in-law had wheat-colored skin, instead of the fair skin color that was most common among noble ladies of that era. However, this different style brought a visual impact to Marin. After seeing Angela's fair skin every day, seeing her wheat-colored skin occasionally was also a different style. What's more, the wheat-colored sister-in-law had a different kind of wild beauty. After the quilt was uncovered, Felice was stunned for a moment, but then she reacted. She knew that there was no way back now. If she was rejected, she would be so embarrassed that she would not even be able to stay in the palace any longer. So, Felice, who had made up her mind, threw away her shyness as a girl, took off her hands covering her chest, opened her heart, and rushed towards Marin. Brother-in-law. A deliberately coquettish voice made Marin shudder all over. Then, Marin was entangled by his naked sister-in-law, Felice. Then, Felice bravely looked at Marin and put her mouth close to him, actively trying to kiss Marin. However, looking at her posture, she seemed very unfamiliar, not like a married young woman at all. Sister-in-law, what do you want to do? Marin finally came to his senses. Brother-in-law, I want to sleep with you, that's what I mean. This is not good. Marin was a little embarrassed. However, thinking of some bad jokes about brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law that he had seen on the internet in his previous life, Marin began to get excited again. Then, Marin began to sneak a peek at Felice's little butt. It is said that half of a sister-in-law's butt belongs to her brother-in-law. Which half of Felice's butt is mine? Marin began to think about this very serious question. Brother-in-law, come on, Felice doesn't want you to be responsible. From now on, I will just be your lover behind the scenes. I won't compete with my sister for the position. Don't want to be responsible. Marin's heartbeat quickened. Men are all greedy. However, when going out to have affairs, the most fearful thing is being blackmailed. Then, the wife and the mistress had a big fight. Marin didn't think he was a perfect man, but he was afraid that his wife Angela would be hurt. If he got into trouble and threatened Angela, he would rather restrain himself. However, if he didn't take responsibility and had an extremely irritating sister-in-law. Never mind, it was my sister-in-law who took the initiative first, you can't blame me. Marin thought of those exciting jokes on the internet in his previous life, and his blood boiled again, overwhelming his mind. So, he fiercely picked up Felice, turned from passive to active, threw her onto the bed amid Felice's screams, and then pounced on her fiercely. 9,999 words omitted below, anyway, it was very intense.